The gaming industry, an unstoppable giant. While it may seem invincible in today's times, there was one little game from the 80s that had a crash landing so impactful it had a lasting mark on the industry. We're diving into the story of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, the game, and its out-of-world impact on the gaming industry that may or may not have caused the gaming crash in the 80s. Now, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, the video game, was released in 1982 and is supposed to be an adaptation of the hit film by Steven Spielberg, E.T. Now, movie video games are very popular nowadays, with games like Spider-Man and Ghostbusters. But movie video games were very popular back then as well, with games like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, after all the movie to video game successes, Steven Spielberg personally saw the creation of E.T. and he wanted to make sure it was done right. Now, people wanted the game to be ready for Christmas season of 1982. This gave them about 6 weeks to do it. As you see, a lot of game sales back then relied on the time of year the game was being released. So Christmas sales were a big deal. To design a game in 6 weeks even now is crazy, but that was even crazier back then, as games back then took about 6 months minimum. So to say the game was being rushed would be an understatement. And somehow they was able to get the game finished for its 1982 release. This is probably thanks to a lot of coke and coffee. Don't forget this was the 1980s. Throw a few cigarettes in there and you'll be working for days. Now, the game surprisingly did very well at launch, as this game was very hyped for. But this goes to show you that sales don't equal a good game. Now, things might look great at the start, but things will start to die off very quick, as people found out that E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial was a terrible game. It was a rush cash grab, and when people found that out, they weren't too happy. It got so bad that it's reported that 3.5 million copies were sent back to the company, from various shops who couldn't sell the game and customers who returned it. Yeah, you know you made a bad game when people can be bothered to return it. Especially seems most of these sales were thanks to Christmas. Now, E.T. was so bad and performed so poorly, many people thought this would be the end of Atari, as it not only damaged Atari's reputation, but it also made the whole gaming market look like a big joke. The company roughly lost about 536 million by the end of 1983. Now, this is where the legend started. Now, many people believe that Atari was so ashamed of E.T. and had so many copies of it that they went somewhere in New Mexico and put it into a landfill. Now, yes, E.T. was a terrible game, but at least it got a nice burial. Now, this was a bit of a myth. Not many people knew if it was true or not until 2015, when they found the landfill in New Mexico that had all these copies. But the only thing that wasn't true is the fact that these were all E.T. copies. They weren't all E.T. copies. There were a load of unsold games, but half of them weren't E.T. Half of them were unsold consoles, unsold games, just a load of garbage. That's all it ever was. As Atari wasn't doing too well, it had so much backed up stock that they didn't know what to do with it. Now, many people believe that E.T.'s massive failure didn't just affect Atari, but it caused the crash of the gaming industry in the 80s, as the gaming market would go from 3.2 billion to about 100 million in just 2 years. That's a hell of a drop. This left many people believing that gaming was just a passing fad. And to be fair to these people, I'm not surprised they thought this. If you looked at anything and it dropped that significantly, yeah, you'd think that was just a passing fad. Now, E.T. wasn't the sole reason for the collapse of the gaming industry in the 80s. There have been many bad games before, so blaming the whole gaming industry's failure on just one game is just loony. Now, there are many culprits that caused the death, and E.T. is just a scapegoat. Now, the main culprit is because the gaming market became way too oversaturated. This saturation of the market is due to a group of individuals who left Atari to form Activision, and Activision started making third-party games, and trust me, Atari was not happy. They sent tons of lawsuits to Activision for using their cartridge design. The problem is, all these lawsuits didn't go through. This meant that the cartridge design was now free to use. This meant it was open season in gaming, and the market was flooded with third-party games. This meant that there was a huge influx of new gaming titles of varying quality. There was no quality control. These were third-party titles. And it didn't just stop at third-party titles. People started making third-party consoles as well. And with this sudden rush of all these companies trying to milk this cow, it's no wonder that the gaming industry collapsed. There was too many choices for games and consoles, and the market was too oversaturated. So what they had to start doing was competing on price. And if you know business at all, competing on price is not a good thing. They had to keep on undercutting each other until they got to a very small amount of profit. And top this with the addition of home computers, which could play all the games and do work, all from one device. Then there's no wonder that the gaming industry was in for a rude awakening. Now, to be completely honest, when looking at all these details, there's no chance that Atari's ET caused the gaming crash. Now, where did this false fact come from? Now, I believe this fact was supposed to be in a comedic sense, which eventually became true. Now, it is pretty funny to think that the whole market was crashed because of one game. ET is like that little nerdy kid which everyone wants to put their problems on. It's pretty funny, but it doesn't mean it's true. So after this collapse, there's no way that gaming can make a revival. But as said, a candle burns brighter in darkness. You just need to know how to light it. A new up-and-comer would come through this devastation and find success. And that company was Nintendo. Now, Nintendo at this time was very big in Japan, but in the US it was never heard of. So Nintendo wanted to expand into the US market, which was now dead. But Nintendo saw that there was still a lot of untapped potential in the US market that people just couldn't see. Now, somehow Nintendo did extremely well in the US. I believe it's due to their focus on quality. People were still queuing outside for this game for miles. They were going store to store to find the Mario games to buy the NES. They just couldn't get enough of Nintendo. And this is due to the focus on quality. Also, the NES was able to stop third-party titles from being made. They did this by adding a chip to the console and the game. This pretty much stopped third-party titles, which before wrecked the market. So now Nintendo could closely focus on the quality games that were being released on their console. Now Nintendo made their first US console look like a VCR. Now the reason they did this was to stop any similarities to previous consoles, which would give people a bad taste. So they completely scrapped the design and made like a VCR design, which people would be very familiar with. Nintendo basically wanted to reboot the whole gaming market. And that's basically what they did. If you ever wonder why elderly people called all consoles, doesn't matter if it's Xbox or PlayStation, they call them Nintendos, it's because back in the day, everything pretty much was Nintendos. They owned 90% of the gaming market back then. Everything was Nintendos. And that's the reason they get this sort of idea. Now, as we said, E.T. wasn't the sole cause of the gaming demise in the 80s. But it definitely shows us what happens when a company's too money hungry and releases a terrible game and expecting everyone to be happy with it. Now, this kind of scares me as history always repeats itself. As at the moment, there's a lot of cheap, terrible games out that are clearly just cash grabs. Games like Gollum, which is one of the worst games ever made. Now, add microtransactions and expansion packs onto this, now I can see a clear demise on the way. Also, the gaming market is becoming very saturated again, with the addition of game passes, mobile games, and the list just keeps on going on. VR as well. The industry is becoming very saturated again. So I reckon in our lifetime, we'll see another gaming crash. And looking at Nintendo, I reckon they'll survive it again. Nintendo still has a heavy focus on quality. And that's what they've done all along. So if there is another gaming crash, I reckon Nintendo will survive. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy, you might enjoy this video. Now, this video is about the problem that's killing modern gaming and may cause the demise of gaming yet again. And if you did enjoy, please consider subscribing and join the Insta Army today. And I'll see you next time. See ya!